This is quite exciting for us, something new that we're going to try over the next few weeks. And we're here to answer a few questions that we've had submitted, and you can ask some more in the Q&A section as well. The little button down below, which we'll go into in a bit. But yeah, thank you for joining. And what we're looking to also educate people on today is one of our new offerings, SFDC Academy, which we'll go through in a little more detail at the end, and we'll have a special discount code as well if you make it through to the end or are interested in learning more about that. So let's kick off into some introductions.
Well, thanks, Dan. I'll jump in, I suppose. So, hi and welcome everybody. My name's Peter Chalmers. I'm the Principal Consultant for Trineo here in Australia. I've been in the Salesforce ecosystem for longer than I'm going to actually say right now. I've come from a client base and then worked in partner land for quite some time. Enjoy all things Salesforce and love bringing that to all of you as well at the same time. Amelia, you're on mute.
Nailing it. Yes, so I'm Aurelia. I know how technology works. I'm a lead engineer at Trineo. I've been in Salesforce working as a developer for I think 7 or so years. And yeah, I've got a few Salesforce certs in system architect and applications architect, and yeah.
One day CTA maybe, Amelia.
One day maybe, if I get bored enough in lockdown.
Yeah. And lastly, hi, I'm Dan Fowley, co-founder and COO of Trineo. I, like Peter, have been in the ecosystem far too long, so have lots of experiences across all sizes of customers. My first implementation was for 2 users, and our largest rollout was for 22,000 users, and I've done everything in between. So have seen it all across the different years.
Brilliant. So should we launch into some questions and hopefully provide some answers?
Let's give it a go.
All right, so we've got some questions that came in overnight over the last few days on our web form, which is a great way of actually getting us some questions beforehand if you've got a chance. The first one we've got is, how would you manage a Lightning migration project, plus some other enhancements on top of that? Dan,
I'll kick off with a few thoughts. So a lot of customers go down the path of just turning on Lightning and clicking the switch and flicking people over because sometimes they feel forced to as timings have come up and new features. But it really is important to take a step back and plan your migration with a bit of thought involved so that you actually make the most of doing the migration. So there are benefits to be had by being on Lightning, and you won't get all of those benefits if you just like for like transition what you have today into the Lightning world. And a lot of those things, the ways that you go about getting the best user experience for your end users will change between the two. So actually parking a little bit of time to rethink some of your core processes and how you can manage those better on Lightning. So then from a user point of view as well, they're not just being thrown this big change in terms of the system as they see it and having to suddenly learn something new, but they're actually seeing some benefit as well to what they're getting, and are motivated to go along for the ride of the change, which may be rocky, as you iron out kinks with the new migration. So yeah, another thing would be, don't underestimate that change management aspect of it. So this is a project to take seriously. It's more than just ticking some boxes and changing some profile permissions, and actually do a rollout as if you're doing your original implementation again, albeit smaller in scope. So that would be some of my thoughts to start with.
Just a further question on that. Sorry, Amelia.
Oh, sorry.
You can tell this is our first one, guys. Do you see any difference between it being a small org migration to Lightning versus a large one? Is there any difference in that approach at all?
Yeah, I think there would be a difference, just as like any system rollout, I guess. So what's your ability to support your users and how you think about how you support your users. So in a small organization, particularly say a call center rolling out Service Cloud where everyone's physically in the same room, then your ability to be over their shoulder supporting them is going to be a lot easier than if you've got a distributed team. Perhaps salespeople on the road who duck in and out of using Salesforce, and so you need, in that case, need to be able to support them when they need it, which could be at the middle of the afternoon. They're out of a sales call and need to do some updates and they get stuck. Now, in that case, if it's too hard, then they might not put the data in, and you start losing the value of the entire system. So, think about the training and the rollout plan and taking people on that ride with the right incentives so that they, are prepared and jump in and use the system.
I guess you could also consider like a pilot group and getting them to figure out all the issues and stuff with your transition to Lightning. But I guess you also need to consider any changes you make and how they may impact Classic and the users still on the Classic as well.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, and I've seen that work well at clients using that pilot group approach. Another approach I've seen is actually as a lot of organizations are expanding their use of Salesforce team by team, so they get to a point where we're bringing on a new team that we would always plan to bring on at this point in time, and that new team goes direct to Lightning, and they become almost the pilot group, so that the internal admins and other people get familiar with what's different and how to think differently around the implementation, page layouts, and that kind of thing. And then it becomes an education exercise so that you can migrate your existing users easier later on.
Cool. Should we move on to our next question?
Let's do it.
So this one is, what some of the best practices you can share for archiving of data, tasks, records, files, etc., without compromising performance? I'm going to take this one in the first place. I think the first thing you've got to ask, or you need answers for, is what's the frequency of your extracts? So, Salesforce has got the ability that you can do an archive extract on a weekly basis or whatever. So you could use that. But, what frequency do you need for the business to actually survive if you have to actually bring your stuff back? What's the ability to restore? Do you have an internal admin that can actually do the restore? How much data and where is that data actually sitting at the moment? And how are you monitoring that at the moment as well? So one of the things I'd recommend is there's a great free app, free being the operative word, called Storage Helper. And that helps you monitor what your storage is, both from a data and also files perspective. Go to the App Exchange, grab it, download it. We'll share a link afterwards with everybody. It's a great way. It's got a dashboard on there so you can monitor what's going on in the laptop and stuff. If you don't have an internal admin that does have the expertise to be able to restore, I would suggest then you look at other apps, something like Own Backup, which is an easy app to use for that, easy to do your backup and also just to bring the data back in. And it does both data and metadata as well. And it's fairly well priced in the overall scheme of things. We used to have the ability to have a restore from Salesforce, but that's now gone. They've disabled or no longer providing that service. So you need to be looking at something that's going to be robust and they'd be able to support your business if you need to bring it back in. So it's not just about the one-way street of archiving it, it's how do I get it back when I need it as well. So
yeah, I think that's the critical piece is backing up's easy, restoring's difficult. Generally, but probably more so in the Salesforce context as well. But if you've got data you're trying to restore that has relationships to other data, and actually restoring those relationships correctly can be one of the more difficult pieces of the puzzle. I think another thing that I've come across in this space, particularly around, I think it's tasks and activities, is, and tell me if I'm wrong on this, but Salesforce actually archives them at a certain point anyway. And a lot of customers don't realize that their records of having called on a customer 3 years ago at some point disappears, and they think that that data is there forever. So having a strategy in place, if you're using those objects heavily, is actually quite crucial.
Cool. Let's have a look at our next question. In an email case-to-case scenario, is there a way to prevent your org from receiving spam or non-legit cases?
Yeah, I can take this. So it's a bit of a tricky one and hard to do much in Salesforce. Probably the best bet is to use your email server to filter out most of the spam. It's their job and they do it well. Within Salesforce, you can do sort of things like matching the email address to contacts. So if you have that contact, then it's probably a legit one. And if it doesn't, put it in a queue to maybe go through and filter out the spam ones. But yeah, within Salesforce, there's no real good answer.
Yeah, one thing I have seen a couple of clients use is an app from the App Exchange, Email to Case Premium, which does have a little bit of functionality to try. I think you can specify keywords and different things to try and filter those out as well, which is one way of helping. But yeah, there's generally, whether it's web to lead or other things, once you start getting spam coming through, it becomes a tough challenge to master.
The joys of the current world that we live in. Let's talk about profiles and permission sets. What's the best way to architect those?
I'll take this one because I wrote a blog post about this the other day. So I've seen a number of customers and orgs going back a long time that have just built up a huge proliferation of profiles. And the default way that you start a profile is to clone it from an existing one. And generally, what would happen is you have some new type of user who's a slight derivative on an existing one with just a couple of permissions changed. This super user needs a delete permission or needs, one extra thing. And so you end up creating an entire new profile in order to solve that problem. And that becomes pretty unmanageable pretty quickly. So permission sets were introduced in 2013, I think. So they've been around a while now as the mechanism to solve that and to allow you to basically build up additive privileges on top of your base profile. So a user will always only ever have one profile, and that won't change. But permission sets gives you this ability to then layer additional permissions on top of that. So maybe you have a base call center profile, and then you add a call center super user permission set, which has a few extra permissions that might be needed. Then as you get into a more complex environment, there's the notion of permission set groups that actually, rather than you've built up all these permission sets, rather than having to assign 15 of them to a given user, that becomes a user management challenge that you can logically group these and assign that group of permission sets to a user, which is an interesting because they have this notion within permission set groups of muted permissions that then override and take certain permissions away again. So that can lead you to a pretty complex situation of all the different ways you can frame this up. But when converting from straight profiles to permission sets, to actually take that step back to rethink around functional areas and things like that as well, so that you don't just go from having 50 profiles to 50 permission sets. You know, there's got to be a better way to arrange all of that.
So there are some things that you can't put into permission sets, such as page layout assignments and default record types and that kind of stuff. So I guess like that you need to first of all come up with your different permutations of those, and that will kind of give you what profiles you need, and then permission sets can be added on top of them.
I think it's also a good time to mention that, you know, what we do, every single org is different, every single customer is different, every single requirement that they need around this stuff is different. So these things can be, there's no one right solution for this, for depending on what the customer's doing and how they're doing it. So, you know, there's got to be a blend and a balance there ultimately as well. So.
Cool. One more thing I mentioned, there is an App Exchange app that can help analyze your profiles. I think it's just called Profile and Permission Set Helper. It's a Salesforce Labs product that can help you analyze and understand, you know, for any given permission, which profiles is this included in, so that it can help you kind of map things out and redesign how you want to do things.
I think one of the strongest solutions there are for an admin is the App Exchange. Go to the App Exchange and see what's there, and always, you know, hopefully there's going to be some kind of solution there in the first place that can help you out along the way.
So those tools, I think they mainly just take the profile, the permissions from a profile and create a one-to-one of profiles to permission sets. But ideally, you would be grouping, creating a permission set for each functional area, and applying those to different profiles, which is probably a nightmare to start with. But I guess converting profiles to permission sets is a good place to start, and then build on top of that.
What's the best way to track that so you understand exactly what you're building out? I mean, it could get very messy very quickly.
A giant spreadsheet, I guess. I think.
That's what I thought the answer was going to be.
That's where my mind always goes. Yeah, you're building up a matrix of what this all looks like. You know, at some point, it's going to get too complex for that even, but it's a good starting point.
I've seen a tool online somewhere that will build it for you, and you can actually edit it, edit profiles in there. That I don't think it works with, I can't remember the name of it either, so this is really useless. But yeah, I think it just is for profiles, not for permission sets. But maybe you can track that down, and it would be a good way to start your matrix.
Cool. Let's have a look at the next question. Our org has Aura components. Should our developers start building in Lightning Web Components? And that I've read about in the release notes. Boy, I really read that round really bad.
Yeah, so I think the answer, short story, is yes. Lightning Web Components are new. I think Salesforce development will mainly be targeted at Lightning Web Components going forward. So Aura is unlikely to get a whole lot of new features added to it. Lightning Web Components use standard frameworks, they use web standards, so it's more likely that they will be supported by most browsers and stuff. They play well together nicely, so you can you don't have to rebuild all your existing Aura components. You can just start building Lightning Web Components, and they can talk to each other and stuff. There are a few considerations with Lightning Web Components. I don't think you can build them in the developer console, so I guess that means you need a developer that is using an IDE to build them, which may be prohibitive for some people. And I think you can't call Lightning Web Components from Quick Actions, so you have to go through an Aura component to do that. So there are some use cases when Aura components are still appropriate, but I imagine that they will become less and less over time.
I imagine, Amelia, that example is just something they haven't got around to building yet, but you would assume is coming at some point.
Yeah.
Is there any kind of difference in performance or any more or less work from a development point of view? Yeah, if you had to code the same thing, one in Aura, one in Lightning Web Components, is it easier in the new way, or any thoughts on that?
For me, they're pretty similar. I think it's just yeah, learning about them is taking, you know, it takes more time than Aura, which I suppose most developers have some idea of by now. But once you've got that learning under your belt, they're pretty similar.
Cool.
Okay, here's a question that I always intrigued by. When should I use workflow versus process builder versus triggers versus before flows?
Yeah, this is an interesting one, eh? Before flows are pretty cool. I've had a bit of a play with them recently, and I think they're a bit of a game changer. I think the short answer is that anything, any updates to the record that triggered the update should be made in a before. So whether that's before flow or before trigger. And the reason for that is anything that is done after, such as after triggers or process builders or workflows, they actually trigger an update to the record. So you're starting at the beginning again and going through all the befores and all the afters. And so that actually adds a lot of CPU time and DML and SOCL to your limits, which can be a bit of a problem. So before flows don't actually allow you to do anything other than update the record that triggered it, which is kind of cool. But obviously you can do that in process builders and stuff. So process builders and workflows I kind of see as more for updates or creating other records or something like that, or triggering outbound messages or that kind of thing. Another consideration is I see a lot of outbound integrations are triggered from after triggers. So if you're doing updates to the record in Process Builder or workflows, you'll actually cause duplicate, not duplicate, but two messages. And I guess the first one is slightly out of date. So that can be a problem. Salesforce recommends you use one automation tool per object, which I'm not sure is completely realistic. But you know, they say that it's a nice way to be able to see what's going on and reliably predict the results of a record change. So that's their recommendation.
Yeah, I'd agree. I'm not sure how realistic that is, particularly once you introduce managed packages that will have chosen to do their package in a particular way. So it becomes, yeah, I haven't come across any org, I don't think, that doesn't have at least one managed package in some form. So yeah, that's a difficult one. Amelia, does platform events play a part here?
Like when you publish platform events and stuff, they
in terms of triggering events off of record changes and that kind of thing.
Yeah, so I guess if ideally publishing a platform event from a process builder for like outbound integrations would be awesome, but that relies on your downstream system being able to listen to those platform events, which isn't very common from what I've seen.
Cool.
But yeah, that's great because it's at the end of the order of execution.
Okay. Next question. Hard coding IDs. What are the alternatives?
Yeah, this can get you into a lot of frustrations when you're deploying up environments. It's most commonly, I think, seen with record type IDs, which yeah, are a pain. So there are a few alternatives. The best one, I think, is to use the developer name and query the record type. So you can do that in before flows. Obviously, you can do it in triggers, but they have their own special functions for getting record type IDs. I don't think you can do it in process builders, but you could do things like custom settings or something like that, where you can populate your IDs if you've got like a record or something that you need to put in there.
We had a process builder recently, which we built out in the sandbox, and it worked perfectly using the record type name, and then pushed that up to prod, and of course it didn't work there. And the only way we could get it to work was actually to use the ID in the process builder. So gotta love those gotchas along the way.
Yeah.
Can you, in a process builder, can you reference a custom setting to kind of pull that in dynamically at least?
I don't think you can. I think you'd need to use a custom label in a process builder.
Actually, yeah, there's a little bit of inconsistency there, isn't there? I've seen actually custom labels used for things that you would ordinarily expect in a custom setting sometimes.
Okay, let's move on to the next one. I want to show a trend over time of data in a report that I run. Currently, I export the report to Excel each month and build my trend graph there. There's got to be a better way.
I'll take this one. Yep, there certainly is a better way. And it's a feature that's been out for a few years now, but it hasn't got as much attention as I think it deserves. And it was originally called analytic snapshots, and now it's called reporting snapshots. And so what that allows you to do is output, for a summary report, output the subtotals, or you can choose what level within your grouped report, publish the outcome of that report to a custom object that you create. So you need to kind of get your head around what the data you need to capture and how you design your custom object, and then you can build this reporting snapshot to push that data in. And then you can run, once you set a schedule, and then you can create a new report based on that custom object that you've just created that's being populated by this snapshot. Some of the challenges I've seen with that is that you may want to have some kind of hard-coded values or something else that you want to populate into that based on a formula at the same time that record is created, and there doesn't appear to be any way of doing that. Even being able to publish something like, what was the report name that generated this? Because then you could have a workflow off of the back of that and say, well, if it's come from this report, I know to do these extra things to actually massage the data in the way that I want, or know that then you can categorize and do the end report that you want. But that's the kind of area where I haven't seen it developed further. It could be really powerful. You can do this as well in Einstein Analytics, and you do get, I guess, a lot more power in how you can do that in Einstein Analytics, and that does solve some of the shortcomings that I've mentioned, but at the same time, Einstein Analytics may be a sledgehammer to crack a nut in terms of what your use case might be for many simple use cases.
Good. All right. I think we're on to almost our last question, by the way. So we've done a migration to Lightning, but we haven't rethought our page layouts. Are there any tips for thinking about how we should do things differently in Lightning?
I think that the big deal with Lightning pages is you just have so much flexibility, and you can put anything anywhere. So in Classic, it would normally be like an embedded Visualforce page, or normally a button that would take you to another page that would do whatever you're doing. So with Lightning, you can bring them all onto your Lightning page. So you can, yeah, like, or put most important things on the, you know, at the top, or like the prominent places. And then other things you can bury in tabs, so you can speed up the page loading times, and, you know, like things that aren't commonly used can be, you know, chucked in tabs, so they're not really bothering the like most important functions that you have to do. So you can split out like your related lists, like pages in Classic end up with pages and pages of related lists, and you scroll forever before you can see anything, But so now you can like chuck them in tabs and just have the ones you care about and group them into related areas so you can see what you care about.
I think to that point, we've got absolutely so much more flexibility around the user experience now that you can do a lot more, to your point. So that should be tested with the end users as well. There's nothing like building something in isolation and then rolling out and everybody going, that's not going to work for me. So, you know, test, validate often, and don't be afraid to move things around and use the tools that we've got there in Lightning for those reasons. So.
Yeah, I think with all that flexibility comes responsibility to not overcomplicate things. Yeah, if you've got conditional components on your page layout, that can make debugging an issue in terms of this user thinks they should be able to see it, but they can't, and sometimes back to basics is a good lesson to remember. I think to Amelia's point, one of the biggest advantages I've seen is just splitting out related lists into their own tabs. It's kind of like you've generally, you know, you might have 10 related lists against an object, but there's probably 5 things you care about and you want to be able to get to quickly, and so just splitting those out into their own tabs. But at the same time, that increases, you know, the maintenance on your page layouts to every time you create a new related object to think about, okay, how's this going to look on the page, you know, that related page layout, and make sure that it's the right user experience.
Okay. Last 2 questions we've got around data storage and recovery, and I think we've sort of covered those off so far. Unless anybody else wants to add anything into that.
I'm not sure if there was an AppExchange app that I got contacted about a couple of years ago, which there's no shortage of AppExchange partners that reach out to all the consulting partners trying to get them to sell their wares. And there was an app that did look useful at face value that would move data into Salesforce big objects. So big objects allow you to have a lot more storage at a lower price point, but you lose the ability to run workflows against those objects or do any kind of transactional aspects with those. But at least gives you a different place that you can store 50 million records, for example. And so this app on the AppExchange would, you know, schedule, allow you to build the rules and move data to those objects when it made sense, which I thought was an interesting concept. I haven't actually come across a customer that's used big objects, but in theory, I like the idea.
I think there are some limitations around querying big objects as well. They're quite,
Yep.
Yeah, quite strict on indexing and stuff like that.
Yeah, well, yeah, lack of indexing, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, we've come to the end of the questions that we've got so far. We'll ask anybody that's on the line with us at the moment if there's any other questions. There is the Q&A box down below that you can ask those questions in as well. So, or we just sit here for the next 5 minutes and just stare at each other. Let's not do that.
Anything coming through? I can't seem to bring up the box.
There's nothing at the moment. Someone must have a question. Come on. question about, you know, how do I get a Trineo t-shirt maybe? I don't know.
Mm.
Well, I think given, oh, here we go.
Something's come in.
Customer communities. How do you restrict lockdown sections of a community to read only for specific users?
Great question. So I guess there's a couple of different ways to think about security in this context. So you've got the these object level security in terms of, you know, what down to field level as to this user logging into the customer community has this profile that can see these things, and you may, depending on the different types of users you have coming into your community, route customers down different profiles that could have slightly different permissions for your different types of customers that you engage in. So that would be one way of ensuring two different views of data based on the different use cases of the users as they kind of come through. In terms of, Amelia's help here, in terms of things like changing the navigation so that certain things appear and don't appear. I can't recall in the builder if you can configure it at that level.
Can't remember either, but I think you can kind of set rules about what components are showed and stuff. But I don't think that would go down to, I guess you could show an edit component and a read-only component depending on whatever your role is. Navigation, I'm not sure.
Yeah, we've definitely built that aspect before. I can't remember how much, if there was coding required or it was available out of the box.
Is that one of those ones we can have a look at and come back with an answer after the webinar?
We sure can.
Cool. There was another follow-up question to that, which further these fields are editable to the user for a certain period of time. They need the restriction placed after a certain date. You know, how you can actually timeline that.
Yeah, that to me would definitely require some form of coding.
I mean, it depends what it's relative to, right? Like, what's the start date? Is the start date the created date of the record? Because you could possibly do some dynamic stuff based on created date to now. And
you could have a simple validation rule, I guess, that says once this field can't be edited after 10 days. It depends. Then it comes back to, do you want it to change from a UI perspective and appear grayed out and things like that, as opposed to letting someone try and edit and then realize at the last minute that they can't do it.
Cool. We have another question. Is there a way to combine Kanban opportunity views across multiple record types? I should know the answer to this. I can't believe I know the answer to this. And the answer is no. There is an idea on the community to allow this, but as it currently sits, you can only have one Kanban view per record type, unfortunately. Oh, it shows
why that is.
Salesforce functionality. It's one of those beauties. So.
Oh, well, hopefully that's something they can address in due course.
You should be able to group it up. So I want to show all of them, or I want to show these ones, and that type of stuff. That would be fantastic.
Yeah.
Hey, Parker, if you're listening. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's all the questions that we've got.
Cool. Shall we start to wrap things up? But before we finish, just wanted to talk a little bit about a new offering that we've just launching here at Trineo, which is called SFDC Academy. And so the idea that we're coming here is not to come in and work with organizations and do things for them, but rather to empower them to do more themselves. So this is a notion of having a coach, of having someone who can be there when you get stuck and help you get unstuck, leveraging all of our experience and combined experience across the whole team to help you get the best advice to move forward with your own internal admin capability and empower up rather than relying too much on outside parties to come in and do things for you, which normally comes at great expense. So the way that this offering kind of works is we have a whole lot of content that we're building and adding to all the time. So this can be screencasts and different tutorials of different types. And the one thing is, when we don't want to reinvent the wheel with this. So I actually think Trailhead is from an enterprise software company. Trailhead is one of the best resources I've ever seen for learning a new platform. But the notion of Trailhead is it has to be done in a particularly generic way so that it's applicable to everyone. And I think what we look to do is complement that and build context into some of our screencasts and tutorials so that we can actually leverage our experience to know, yes, you can do it this way, but these are the traps that you need to look out for along the way and things that you should be aware of, because it's common that we stumble across these limitations in Salesforce and you suddenly realize you're 3 steps forward, 2 steps back. And if we can help you get to that destination faster by knowing what to look out for, that's our goal with that. The next aspect that we bring is just like this on this call, is a notion of community. So members of SFDC Academy get access to our Slack group where you can ask us questions just like this anytime. And again, that's the way that you can get unstuck if you're trying to achieve your example with the customer community and have certain requirements to not have to wait for the weekly webinar, but being part of a group where you can ask that question very quickly. And lastly, customization in terms of actually giving that one-on-one attention on a group Zoom call where you can actually screen share and demo your specific problem and get your very specific questions answered in that kind of a forum. And we'll look to expand kind of the offering over time as well. So one thing for everyone who's stuck on the line is we've added a discount coupon code to get 50% off your first 3 months. So I'll go back a slide so you've got the website address down there. So if anyone is keen to learn more and get a discount on their first 3 months, use that code COACH50 and you'll get 50% off your first 3 months. So we sell this in quarterly blocks so that you've kind of got that membership to the community and all of the resources that you can use for that quarter. And if it doesn't meet your requirements, you don't renew your subscription. As long as we keep adding value, we hope that you'll keep renewing and keep getting more value out of it as you go on. So that is our little spiel for SFDC Academy. Peter, what's next week?
Yeah, so next week we've got I think this is an exciting one. It's Demystifying Einstein Analytics, which is a great title. We've got Andrew Price, who's the Director of Go-to-Market for Einstein here in Australia and New Zealand, joining us. It's all things Einstein. It's not just analytics. We're going to be talking about the bots and everything else that's there as well. So I hope you can join us for that one. And again, we'll have the registration page that we'll punch out, and that ability for you to load some questions beforehand and all that type of stuff as well. But come along, because that one will be exciting. If you haven't seen Andrew talk before, he'll talk for the full 45 minutes just by himself.
And that's same time, same day of the week, Peter?
Same bat time, same bat channel.